Let's take a look at this Road to Enlightenment by Conquistador Games. Me dragging my feet to avoid a world at war just a little longer. I'm still clipping it. I'm still clipping Gathering Storm. Anyway, this is a game, I saw a board game blogger's review of it and said, you know, I'm really interested in this game. From his description of it, I started keeping my eye out on it. And when I started seeing in general the ratings it was getting, etc., I said, yeah, I can wait on it and it'll come down in price. And damn, it did. I got a copy new for $12. People are selling it for less than that used. But when you factor in shipping, what the hell, get a new copy? Well, new copy didn't help too much. It's kind of hard to tell, but one of these counters, and it's important that these not be damaged, was damaged right from the beginning. You know, right off the counter sheet. It was even worse here, so it could have been worse than it is. I could put just a little blue or maybe do a little clipping to all the counters or anything. Anyway, that could be a big deal because that's all an issue. These are items which stay secret and have to remain secret. I don't know what that one is, but I would learn pretty quickly. I've played this once with my wife. We did the 2-player game. We didn't use the special rules for... There's like a short game that includes 2 players in the back. We just played with the full game as a 2-player game. It worked out perfectly fine. There's some aspects that maybe aren't that important, but I found myself using diplomacy. There's this little diplomatic track here to prevent her from being able to attack me as easily and stuff. So it really doesn't get harmed, I think, too much by playing 2-player. It may be a little too deterministic at times, but it's hard to tell. Okay, first thing about it is the rules are a bloody mess. You know, it's not that complex a game, but they managed to really make it difficult to understand what the hell it's all about from the beginning. But the basic concept of the game is that you're going for a series of different point values in a period that's nicely represented. It's going to be one of my favorite time periods. Basically, from the Peace of Westphalia until what is the next piece? Thinking of Queen Anne's Wars piece. I don't remember the name of where that was. But anyway, covering the diplomatic period where, you know, Spain ends up as you have the Spanish inheritance because of Charles what's his name? Charles II of Spain, his dying heiress, and all that kind of situation. So that the game actually starts at an earlier point than that, but many of the leaders are from a later period. So like William III of England as the King of England. Well, the game starts out with England and the Netherlands linked, and, you know, doesn't really worry about the Spanish inheritance as a specific issue within the game. It can be formed, you know, as a problem. It can have the same effects throughout the game, just by the way people play things. So maybe some of the cards have an effect on it. And there's a compendium back here of key concepts. This might be useful to read as the first thing if you were looking at it. But anyway, the first thing they go with is setup, which is fine, but it's purely procedural and sometimes doesn't terribly explain what's going on all that well. Each player, and it holds up to 7, is going to get a player aid card, a set of 3 of these cards for actions, attack, diplomacy, and reorganization. You're always going to have those, and they get some cash equal to half their starting money. And I'm probably not with enough space here, but I'm going to have to make a little bit more space between the powers. just so that I have room to put cards in these spaces. Okay. And let's see, where were we? Right, each player gets a player aid card. They also get, there's another player aid here. Well, this is their player mat. They get a player aid card that gives them the sequence of play, and then how to resolve attacks and negotiations, which are one of a number of different possibilities in the game for actions. You also get a pile of these things, which you're going to be using a couple of them here on the arts and science tracks to record how far you've progressed on those. Others are going to be used to mark territories cities you've captured, essentially, locations, general areas. Now, you can only capture certain areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. When you score the game, your victory points are going to consist of a couple of points if the religious struggles go in favor of your country's religion. So there's more Catholic players than there are anti-Catholic players. And in any scenario with an odd number of players, there will always be a few more anti-Catholic. There will always be one more anti-Catholic player. There's a fudge rule in here, but that fudge rule may actually skew the game against the Catholics, actually. But we'll see. So you're going to get points for 2 points for that. You get, I think it's 3 points for being the top of one of these two tracks, and 1 point for being in second place on the track. If you're the first person to reach one of these coins on the tracks, you'll get an additional point for that. And then the remaining points that you might score are for territories that you've captured. And you can only capture territories that have your color on them. So for example, Russia can only go into areas that have gray on their sheet. Now sometimes it's kind of hard to see. So like gray and purple are very, very similar. I can come in with the camera and it's even hard to see them where they kind of blend together there. But we'll try to see what's going on with that. Anyway, moving on. The first part of setting up the game, you slap some of these down. Well, you don't have to do this first, but starting with period 4 and going on to turn 10, you'll put early markers and then late markers for the rest. And those are going to be duplicates. We'll take a look at them after we set up. But basically, there's going to be one religious, one science, one art, and I think that's it. And that'll leave 3 blanks, 3 nothing happens. For the late set, it's the same, except one of the nothing happens is replaced with the game end marker, so you don't know how long the game's going to last. So those are placed face down. Then each player, then you're going to prepare the decks for players. And the way these are done is, we take the guys with a gold star. These are going to be favorites. They're sort of everlasting and always replenishing leaders that you can get. And each Catholic player is going to get a purple one. Each anti-Catholic player is going to get a pink one of these. Then we combine the red and blue favorites into a pile, and the green and orange favorites into a pile. Shuffle those 2 piles separately, and the French player will be handed the green and orange pile, and the red and blue will go to the player to France's right. We got a problem here just because of the way I sequence things, but we'll try to figure out how to do that. Anyway, so each player gets a pile, and then they get to select one of the leaders from that pile. Now, those piles are limited by size. They're not as big as I just said. Separate the luminaries into 6 piles. Okay, so the purple and pink are at random. The red and blue, we remove enough from each so the total is one more than the number of players in the game. So, I don't know how many we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we'd be removing one even in a 7-player game at random. But beyond that, you have basically a selection from whatever's available. And then they get passed. Let's see. The French player selects one and passes the rest left. The other player selects one and passes the rest right. So then each player is going to be, so, you know, the French side, they'll pick one of theirs and then they'll pass, say it's to England to the left. And let's say France is the last, or Spain is the last player, they'll be passing theirs to the right. So each player gets kind of a serpentine pick out of this, where, you know, they may get 2 middle picks or they may get the first and last picks or whatever from each pile. And then what they're going to get, after they've selected that, they should have 3 favorites each. One religious favorite, and one out of either the political and military stack, and one out of the art and science stack. Okay. Now, once you've done that, the favorites will be removed from play, and whatever wasn't picked, and then we shuffle the other piles and put them face down here, the non-favorites. And I could actually have them, you know, set up at this point because they don't really affect anything right now. So those non-favorites are then going to be available for picking, starting with Louis XIV and then going in turn order. Each player draws a card into their hand from any of the 6 piles, accepting whatever's in the opposite religion from them. So everybody's going to eventually have 10 full luminaries. There are 3 favorites and 7 more. Each of these cards has a number of values on it, which correspond to these things. So, for example, this would be a politics up here, this would be military, this would be art, and this would be wealth. To some extent, you want a balance of these, but there's some that are more important than others. For example, wealth and politics are always going to be important in terms of generating your income for the game. But other ones can be very valuable. Plus, they might have some special abilities. Special abilities are of different types. Well, everybody pretty much has one. So one of the simplest special abilities is an action, which you can use as an action instead of one of the actions from here. And it tells you something you do. And the way it's worded, sometimes there are going to be some ambiguities in how these cards are worded, or in how the rules are worded. So there is a bit of sloppiness there. Some of them will be enhancements. Enhancements, you play them along. You play a person with an enhancement along with an action, and they can trigger the enhancement. Each action you do, you can trigger one enhancement along with it. The guy whose enhancement you trigger also gets whatever values he has. So whoever's action you play gets his values, if they apply to the action for some reason. Whoever's enhancement you play gets to use his values in the action. You can throw additional people in for their values as well. And then there's one more type of card that I see here, which is a response, which is basically something when someone else does something, you can trigger a response. You play that directly from your hand. You don't have to pre-plot that. So when you're actually playing the game, what you're going to be doing is the first thing you do is this action selection, where each player basically looks at their handful of cards and sets aside what they want to do in each of these 3 slots. Now this slot is always an action. You don't have to do one, but you probably want to. At the very least, you can take the reorg action, which allows you to draw 2 new cards from here. That can be dangerous though, but you can also place additional luminaries on there and destroy them. I don't think you can destroy your favorites that way, but maybe you can. Why not? If you really hate your favorites, and I probably should have done that last game. I don't see anything against that, but we can, perhaps there is. It seems odd, either way. Okay, the second action is normally going to be a second action that's available for you to play. Alternatively, though, you could play, well, when these are turned up, some of them are going to be matching art, science, or the religious problem. If one of those is available for this turn, instead of playing an action here, you can play cards towards the census. And one thing you have to kind of do is, it's possible that you could play an action card towards the census. For example, you could play this guy. He could count towards a census, but he's also an action card. And there's no real way of differentiating that within the components of the game. So basically, you either have to go on a trust matter with that, or maybe come up with some mechanism like, hey, if you're doing a census, turn your cards a certain way, or turn any action cards upside down, or whatever in there, just so that it's clear that you're not using them as an action. Again, that's just kind of making shit up for the game, because actually it doesn't really tell you how to cope with that situation at all. Finally, you have points that you can put into your taxes and trade. And if you don't put points in here, you won't be getting additional cash. What's additional cash important for? Well, we'll see in a moment. But basically maintaining your forces, which can be a problem. But it also fuels some of these cards. Some of the cards ask you to use some money. Okay. Then you're going to resolve the actions. Well, each action is resolved differently. Now, the actions off the cards tell you how they're resolved. So this says advance one religion, exhaust him. Hey, you'd get a mark, he's pro-Catholic, so you'd advance it towards Catholic, and you'd end up exhausting him. Whenever you exhaust a luminary, he just goes over here into your discard pile. You'll be getting some, maybe all of them back. Your hand size remains the same all game. You can have 7 luminaries and 3 favorites. I guess if you destroy favorites, you're allowed 10 total. Any favorites you put in the exhaust pile, you'll automatically be getting back. Anyone else who ends up in the exhaust pile, you may or may not be getting back, depending on how many cards you have in your exhaust pile and how many spaces you have to refresh your hand at the end of the turn. Which is why this becomes sort of a little weird deck management thing, as some people pointed out, but it's very oddly such. You're not like drawing a random deck hand of cards. You don't have a very big pile here usually. You're trying to keep your deck right about the size of what you want usually, so, and keep control over it. Okay. So now, what about the 3 base actions? Well, the 3 base actions, attack. The way that's going to happen is you pick an area where you can conduct a military activity. Oh, in addition to that, each player has a series of special powers. So you have one that's a positive, like this. You do not have to pay upkeep for conquered territories because he's got a global empire, whatever. I don't know why that's the case, but he's also uninspiring leadership, -1 to all battle, negotiations, and census stacks. And finally, a declining empire. Once per game, you may begin the game with your full treasury limit in coin. You may begin the game with your full treasury. Oh, I gotta give him some more money. Yeah, I gotta look at these before I start because some of them are at the start of the game. But basically, you have a general advantage that always applies, a general disadvantage that always applies, and then a once per game bonus. And it's possible for players to cancel out your once per game bonus. There's a card that does that. It's not clear whether it cancels it for good or if it just prevents it from being used that turn. We rolled a die on that in our game. Again, ambiguities. This is the first player marker. It shows who the first player on any given turn is. That's going to rotate. Board Game Blogger mentioned that there's some order of play issues in this and that you might want to house rule randomizing the sequence. I'm not sure how big a deal that is, but we'll see. Okay, So when you do an attack, what you do is you pick a territory and you have to connect to a territory that you control by a dashed line, or else go from a port that you control to another port on the same sea. And we've got like an Atlantic, a Mediterranean, and a Baltic Sea, and that's about it. And things are specified. So for example, Istanbul's just on the Mediterranean. It's not on the Black Sea. There is no Black Sea. Here we've got Baltic and Atlantic sea zones connected over there in Kiel or whatever. Okay, so you have to be able to connect, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be getting points as follows. For a military endeavor, you're going to get points equal to either your Army or Navy strength, depending on which type of attack you're making. If you're making a land attack, you use Army strength. If you're making a naval attack, you make Navy strength. If you're attacking a port, you have the option. Well, so for example, France from here could make either a naval or a land attack into the Spanish Netherlands, depending on what what they're facing, basically, in terms of values. Now, so you're going to have a total equal to, for an attack, your military capability, either land or naval, action cards that you threw into the attack capability, you get to add all their military ratings, which is the guns, and any coins that you committed to your attack. Now you do all this and announce how many luminaries you're sending, how many coins you're sending, and whether or not you're going to trigger an enhancement before you actually make the attack. Now when you make the attack, anybody allied to the person being attacked has the opportunity to aid and throw extra cards in. And anybody allied to the person attacking can throw extra cards in order to help fight. And they can also toss money in. The defender, if he's an active player, is able to play cards after the attacker announces what he's in. He can play military cards, well, any cards with or without a gun, but the guns count. He can throw additional money in, and he can use somebody's enhancement to help his fight. Allies can contribute luminary cards, but they can't contribute enhancements. They can throw coins in. You must be allied with a player to assist them, but everyone's allied to the brown stuff, which isn't controlled by anyone. If there were non-player powers, as there were in my two-player game, they're easy picking because people aren't allied to them unless they've already set up an alliance, and they don't play cards or anything on their own. So they become a little too easy to beat up on. However, we found that the balance of power, even in two players, worked out pretty well. And we weren't seeing massive conquests of Europe. In fact, it felt very historical what we saw happen, a deadlock happening in the Spanish Netherlands for the most part, because it's easy to conquer. All right. So the number of points that the attacker has and the number of points that the defender has are revealed. Enhancements triggered, one per side, and if the attacker has more points than the defender, each point the attacker has more will equal one die that they get to roll. What they're trying to do is to overcome a number on the territory they're trying to attack. So for example, in the Spanish Netherlands, Britain and France can each attack it, and they only have to get 2 hits on it. Purple, the Austrians, can attack to take it, and they need 3 hits. No one else is allowed to attack an area who doesn't have a color in there. And that is how the game kind of directs your national interests, right? So, England, and you're able to attack your own original home territories if they fall. And in fact, those have different values. They don't have a value listed on it here. Their value is somewhat inversely related to how hard it was for the the current owner to take it, up to the point where if it's a 5 that the current owner had to take, you have actually a 0. You can essentially automatically retake it by doing a conquer result. Interesting. So you don't want to go for a home country central location for them, which I did not realize at all. Okay. So you roll a number of dice equal to the difference. You're trying to get a number of 6s equal to your target number on the territory. If you succeed, you get one of your big blocks in that territory. And that's going to be worth a victory point to you for capturing territories other people own. If territories that you should own get taken from you, you end up losing 2 victory points for each of those. So stealing territories that were home territory of someone can be a big way of knocking them down. All right, but there are some possible... I lied. If you get the number of hits exactly equal to the amount that you need, so if you needed 0 hits to get into an area and rolled no dice, then you go to the negotiation segment of the fight. And the way negotiation works is both players keep all the luminaries that they had assigned, and I believe they're allowed to throw new ones in. First, you remove any money spent on the attack itself. And I don't see... Yeah, you're allowed to throw additional cards and money in. And those additional cards and money and the original cards are only going to count for their politics value. So their politics becomes the winning factor. And whoever gets the most in that case takes the territory. The attacker wins ties. So every battle will be resolved. If it comes out as a tie from the military side, you go to the negotiation side and you may be expending more cards. Now, the general rule with all actions is whoever you commit to something becomes exhausted. So they go into your discard pile. Some things will convert something immediately to a negotiation, in which case the coin you have already committed is usable for that negotiation as well. Okay. The next action is diplomacy. Diplomacy allows you to ally with another player. In order to do this, you have to exhaust 5 political points from your hand, not committed to the action. And you put an allied cube on the diplomatic track. And basically you have 2 cubes, at war and allied. Blue is allied, and you match that between the 2 powers. And those 2 powers can't fight each other without going to war. That's the general case anyway. And they can support each other in military and diplomatic actions, negotiation actions. The red is at war. If you're not at war with someone, you can't attack them. But you can immediately expend 5... you can set an attack action, and as you do the attack action, you can spend 5 politics to put a little red at war cube between the 2 of you. Whoever starts the war has to pay something for it, but then it's just underway. And that can be done directly from a diplomacy action. Yeah, right after you've been diplomatized, you could still turn around and go right back to war if you want to spend the 5 extra politics. What's kind of neat about that, though, is if somebody pre-planned and wasn't planning on going to war with you because they're already at war with you, you can do an alliance with them, and now you've signed some sort of truce or something, and they may not have the politics points left in their hand to discard and exhaust in order to go back to war with you. The final thing is a reorganization out of the base actions. And for this, you draw 2 luminaries, your choice of what type. Put them in your hand. And any other luminaries that you had set up in that action, up to 2, you may remove from the game. Well, it's not really removed from the game. They actually get tucked under the deck face up. They'll get reshuffled if there's a need for them. We didn't run out of any decks, and I think it may even be unlikely in 7 players to do so. We'll see. There's going to be more cards gone. Okay. When a census comes up, anybody who's competing in the census, in this space, and choosing not to use an action, is going to add up, is going to match up a pairing for that. In the case of a religious census chit coming up, they have to match their religious, either Catholic or anti-Catholic, and politics values. And whichever one is less is going to be their total. So you kind of want to put nearly equal values. You might have some modifiers in there. In the particular case of the religious census, because there are more Catholics than anti-Catholics, the anti-Catholic gets an additional 3 dice of points, which is quite a bit, actually, added to their total. That may be a really huge swing in the game. One player is unlikely to be thrown, well, 10 or 11 points maybe, especially since everybody, well, so the thing is, everybody gains on your side from having the counter on their side. So some alliances and agreements could well cause that to shift. The decision of how much to commit to there could become part of an alliance agreement very easily, because it does help everyone on that side. On the other hand, committing 10 points to that is a fair expense, and you may or may not be willing to do that. In a 2-player game, it was very clearly as valuable as any other of these tracks, so it was worthwhile. It's less clear how that dynamic is going to work out in the multiplayer game. All right, and if your side has the higher total value, this thing shifts 3 spaces in the direction of the side with the higher value. Okay, the final thing is the accounting. Oh, let's talk about these others. So this one requires that you have science and light bulbs, because you need to be able to read the science that you wrote in order to advance in it. Whichever is the lowest value is going to bump you forward. Well, no, is going to be that many spaces, that many points for you. Sorry, not spaces. Whoever has the most points in a cultural census in one of these 2 tracks is going to push forward 4 spaces, and the second highest total goes forward 2 spaces. Now this is a track where only 1 cube can, or 1 block can be in each space. So if 2 people end up on the same space for any reason, one of the people gets demoted. And essentially, there's some rules to the demotion. Okay. If you moved up or down, you stay in the spot you moved to. The other person gets bumped downward. If you moved up, you occupy the space as opposed to someone who moved down. The momentum's in favor of you. If you moved up more than someone else, you get the space. The other people move down. And finally, if somehow those don't resolve it, whoever is closest to the starting player for that turn gets the space. Okay. Art works exactly the same way, except the combination is art and wealth. Wealth can't be confused with money. Wealth is the marker on here, on the cards. Money is something different that you expend for a couple of reasons. Okay. The next thing you do is the accounting. Every turn you have a chance to put people in here. You combine politics and wealth markers. The lower of the 2 is how many coins you produce. Then you're going to have to pay maintenance, and you pay maintenance equal to your upkeep value plus however many territories you've captured. That's how big your foreign army is going to be. And if you can't afford that, you'll be penalized. If you have foreign conquests, you lose one of them if you can't afford the full upkeep. You pay what you can, and otherwise you just lose 1 territory. If you don't have any territories and you can't afford it, then you have to destroy one of your luminaries. And let me see. You randomly remove one from your exhausted pile. If you don't have an exhausted pile, what do? I don't know. Probably nothing. If you've somehow not exhausted anyone, you haven't done anything that turn. So that's pretty cool. And that could actually, I guess, kill. I have to look that up because I'm not sure how it's worded. Favorites may always be in the center here and never go to the exhausted pile, in which case you can't lose them that way. On the other hand, I don't mind if you lose a favorite and if you can discard them through playing the Reorganization chip. Now, after you pay your upkeep, you're then limited and you can't have more money than your treasury limit. And that's pretty much it. You play through. These will be turned up once people select their initial hand of cards. We'll see the order for the early section. Once the last actual playable part, once the actual cultural census, the last cultural census in the early phase is turned up, is played, there might be more no effect chits in here, but we still play the turns for them. But all the late chits are turned up, so you get to see how long the game's going to go and which censuses are left to plan for. I had some fun playing this two-player. It wasn't, an absolute blast, but it looked very interesting. I have some worries about it multiplayer, and especially multiplayer solitaire, but we'll take a look and see how it works out. Hopefully it won't get too hairy, but there's a lot of pre-planning, and I hate doing pre-planning, so we'll probably see a lot of mistakes in terms of, shit, I should have done that, people going bankrupt and this, that, and the other. Hey, so what? At least we'll see the mechanisms in play. Let's send this one up.